The Garden of Ink and Bones is a monthly podcast about witchcraft, powerful plants, and making magic. I'm Belle of Belladonna and Bones, and I'll be joined by occult artist Rue of Old Omen, and we're witches who like to get our hands dirty. To us, magic is practical, visceral, and bound in blood to the soil and bones of our spiritual allies. It's time to get your hands into the dirt, do the work, make magic, and feel the witchcraft in your bones. Welcome to the Garden of Ink and Bones. In our first episode, we're going to discuss magical mugwort, lunar timings, and traditional witchcraft, A Cornish Book of Ways by Gemma Gary. Hello, my dear Rue. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and why we decided to start this podcast?
Hi everyone. So my name is Rue, and as Belle said, I am of Old Omen on Instagram. I share a strong love for working with all plants and their spirits, which I think is one main reason that we started this podcast together. It's something that there's definitely a creative force that we both share that passion. I'm also, as she mentioned, I'm an artist. I work and forge my magic through various mediums, from ritual tattooing, drawing to bone carving, and various other crafts that I can get my hands gritty and dirty with. I absolutely adored forging my own talismans. I work with an eclectic group of spirits, from ancestral to plant to other ones that I feel a strong pull towards. So why we started this podcast? Well, I think it's pretty common sense. Belle and I were spending a lot of time anyway speaking about our gardens and what we were working with, and it only made sense to start documenting all of that information together, and thought that it would be also a great medium for anyone out there listening to think about new ways to work with your plants and what you have going, looking at different ways that other people forge their magic using them, giving you new ideas, and hopefully the audience giving us ideas as well.
You know what? I think you're exactly right. I think there's lots of podcasts out there, lots of fantastic podcasts out there that talk about magic, and they'll talk about great books about magic and things. And I think one of the things we really wanted to talk about was making magic. And I think a defining part of our practice for both of us is we both like to get out there and do stuff rather than just sit and read about it. And I think the other thing that defines us a little bit is that we both like to work within the plant realm very, very heavily. We both grow plants. We've been exchanging plants for years. And, that's just how we work our magic.
Exactly. It just makes sense, I guess.
Yeah. What I really hope our audience gets out of this is the impetus to walk outside, reach down, grab some leaves. Doesn't matter whether they're a specific magical plant, and just write a charm on them.
Exactly. Yeah, they've all got their own magic, they don't have to be poisonous or entheogenic or anything like that. I think if you listen hard enough that you'll find that everything has its own form of magic.
And that's it. And I think, definitely a future episode for us is about listening to the plants.
Yes, for sure.
So the first plant we wanted to cover off was mugwort. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill plant. It's considered really common because it's right there in its name. It's Artemisia vulgaris, which is common mugwort. It's supposed to grow everywhere. If you live in Australia like us, that might not be quite the case, but it can get quite weedy, but it is very, very easy to grow. So I have a few growing. It grows from cuttings. It grows from root division. It supposedly grows from seed. Not that I've ever had any luck. What about you?
I haven't had any luck with seed, no, but I have noticed that it is one of those things that the moment you put it in your garden, you will turn around and find it in 5 new places sprouted up. It's definitely a creeper.
Very true, very true. I actually put in a variegated mugwort that, seriously, I can't get rid of it. It's gone everywhere.
It's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. It's pretty. So, the first thing that we talk about when we talk about plants is what family they're from. Mugwort is one of the Asteraceae family, which is daisies and asters and sunflowers. So something that people are really familiar with, but they might not expect that mugwort, and such a powerful plant, is just a simple daisy family.
Exactly. But it is, as you said, it's one of those ones that will quite surprise you with just how potent the effects can be, even from, historically often used in dream pillows. Of simply placing it under your pillow, you'll find quite an effect from such a seemingly common little herb.
Exactly. So mugwort has lots and lots of names. It's also been known as sailor's tobacco. The herb is St. John the Baptist, maiden's wort and cronewort, mother's herb, felon herb, and una. because it's mentioned in the 9 herbs charm of heathenry. How do you harvest your mugwort?
So I tend to have a basic method for harvesting all my herbs, and as I'd like to point out, it's the way I do it doesn't mean that that's how everyone does it. I think there's definitely multiple ways to skin a cat. So I have a little cutting knife that I have for all of my magical plants that I keep in a pouch on me. And I tend to pick a certain time of the day. So for me personally, and like I said, everyone has their own special methods. Mine is I like to work between either dusk or dawn in those times where the veil is thin, those in-between spaces. Mm-hmm. And I tend to, first of all, going way, way back, I like to grow a plant before I do harvest it. Sometimes, if you're wild harvesting, you don't have that choice, but I like to at least try and build that relationship with that plant first before approaching it to use it. I tend to give it an offering. So sometimes that might just be a cup of water, something basic like that. I ask its permission and I try and feel the intent in my gut of where to cut, how much I can take without being disrespectful of the plant. And yes, always giving it something back. How about you, Belle?
Yeah, my timings are a little more rigorous, I guess. Oh, no, it's not rigorous. That's the wrong way to say it. They're more restrictive, I guess. Mm-hmm. In the last 12 months, I've started working with timings from the Hygromantia, which is a grimoire. They're timings that talk about lunar days and what days are good for certain things. And then there's also, on top of that, you look at what planetary days are, being that Monday is the moon, Tuesday is Mars, Wednesday is Mercury, Thursday is Jupiter, Friday is Venus, and Saturday is Saturn. So for me, mugwort is a Venusian plant, so under Venus, I would ideally harvest it on a Friday. There's also things called planetary hours. So starting at dawn, one of your times, there's different hours that are good for different things. So I'd try to find the most beneficial time to harvest the plant. Of course, if I'm looking for the roots, I will try to harvest it while the moon is new or waning. And if I'm looking for the aerial parts, I try to harvest it when the moon is waxing or full. But it does really depend. Like sometimes when I'm making dream pillows and things, I will harvest the aerial parts when the moon is new. So it's more of a harvesting for the purpose for me.
Yeah, no, lovely.
As you said earlier, mugwort's heavily a dream plant. Mm-hmm. Medicinally, we can look at the fact that it's full of thujone. Not as full of thujone as wormwood, but still has a reasonable amount in there. And that does have an effect on dreaming and things like that. So what have you used the plant for in terms of dreaming?
I think the most common one, and when I very first started working with mugwort, because it is probably one of the oldest herbs in my garden and one I was drawn to for a very long time, I, of course, started with working with the dream pillows. I'd found a little charm to work with it with, putting it into a deep purple velvet pillowcase, not larger than the palm of my hand, and slept with it under my pillow for a few nights. And then, as I, over the years, have begun to work more and more with mugwort, started to experiment with different ways that it could be used. So working from teas to tinctures to all sorts of things, of just trying different ways and seeing what different effects I get. There was even a very, very beautiful balm that you made, that you gifted me quite some time ago, that I found had absolutely phenomenal effects. I just could not contest what more. It was absolutely beautiful. But yeah, the first one, and it's always a nice, gentle way for anyone looking to experiment with mugwort, is to try it just simply a little bit under your pillow or next to your bed at night, just to sort of see if you have any adverse effects to it or anything like that first. But it's a good, easy way to see just how does it actually change your dreams, help especially with, say, visionary dreaming and lucid dreaming.
Yeah, exactly right. I was looking, and now I can't remember which book I was looking, but I will find the reference for you guys. But it was talking about mugwort, and it said, if you dream in black and white, mugwort will make you dream in colour. If you dream
I remember that.
Yeah, if you dream in colour, mugwort will make you able to influence your dream. It will slowly take you through the levels, or not so slowly. It can cause nightmares. So if you do have restless sleep patterns, you might want to dial back on mugwort. Of course, if you're allergic to daisies, don't use mugwort because you will have an allergic or a histamine reaction.
Yeah.
And the other time you really shouldn't use mugwort is when you're pregnant or trying to conceive, because mugwort is an emmenagogue, which means that it stimulates the uterus, and that means that, can bring on menses, so your period.
Yeah, I remember reading in a book recently actually about bathing in it and bringing on your menstrual cycle. So it is quite potent in that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with bathing in it, you can totally use it if you have inflammation. One of the other things that it's often talked about is putting mugwort in your shoe. So you can put mugwort in your shoe to halve the feeling of the distance that a journey takes. Now, it's anti-inflammatory. So that may make your feet, like medicinally, it might be because it makes your feet feel a little better at the end of the day. And of course, putting it in a bath, it will relax the muscles and, help with that. So there's those reasons that it might have been known as a travel herb.
Yeah, exactly. I've also found working with it over the years too, burning it for scrying has been another good one that I've also found, and throwing it into the hearth. I find it's also quite good for a little bit of divination as well as your visionary sort of journeying through the night.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love it for divination. It makes a really good smoke, like a thick dancing smoke. Is how it burns on a charcoal. So that's always really good. I mean, one of the reasons is that the leaves have a really high fiber content, which the Chinese take the leaves and they dry them and then they crush them until the leaf powder, the chlorophyll, all falls away, and they have this white fibre that they call moxa. And moxa is used in moxibustion, which is a type of Chinese medicine where they heat areas, and they might heat it from a little bit further away. So they'll have these little moxibustion sort of cigarette shapes, smudge stick shapes, and they'll put them just over the top of the area, and the heat, it's a really smouldering heat and can bring the blood to the surface to help heal an injury.
Wow.
Yeah, but really one of the interesting things is that they'll actually use it to burn a patient. So they'll actually cause blistering, so they can burn it straight on the skin and cause blistering to really activate a acupuncture point or things like that. I don't think you'll find many modern practitioners who do that. Certainly certainly not in the Western world, because we're a bit afraid of that kind of thing.
I've never heard of that one before. That's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's great. One of the other things that happens with it is I used to take mugwort, roll it up into balls with fat, put it onto the heads of monks, their little bald heads, and light it on fire. And this would leave a scar, of course, which was supposed to open your third eye.
There you go. Coming back to that divination again,
Exactly.
Being a visionary herb.
It just has so many uses, and I think one of the things that we often fail at is we only look at herbs from a Western point of view. If anyone's interested in Chinese medicine, then I do really recommend The Way of Chinese Herbs by Michael Tierra. It'll give you a different point of view.
Yeah, and they're definitely one of those cultures that through history has done such advanced searching into the different medicinal herbs. Like everybody's aware of the term of Chinese medicine.
Exactly.
There's so much to learn that, I think that sometimes we overlook keeping it in more of the European dialogue.
Yeah. And how you were talking about how gentle herb pillows and things can be. It's really interesting because there's an author called Daniel Schulk, which I know you know about, but our listeners might not. And he's very much at the, would you even call it high end of traditional witchcraft?
Yeah, it's sort of bridging that, stepping away from, I guess, a bit more from the practice that we follow of a bit more, not ceremonial, but high end, I guess, is a way that you could explain it. It's difficult to.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to quantify what it really is, but
A bit more structured, maybe.
Yeah, structured, formal, maybe.
Formal, yeah.
One of the things he has in his book, Viridarium Umbris, talks about using the essential oil of mugwort, and I'll just read this out to you. Her essential oil may be better than any dreaming salve, or yet in the minute dose of 1/4 drop be spun with a single drop of almond oil and used to anoint the brow, or yet beneath the nose, that its inhalation in sleep be constant. And it's like the world of difference between doing that and a dream pillow. Like the level of dosage is huge.
Yeah, and well, essential oils are that heavily concentrated form of that, very as self-explanatory, the essential of the plant. Like, it's no surprise. And I know I've also heard in the past of essential oil becoming you being used for consecration and anointing of crystal balls and other mediums as well. Like, again, just using that very core of the plant to bring about such amazing and profound effects.
Yeah, I have a copper still, which I use, and I ran the mugwort through it the other weekend actually at the full moon at the start of the year. I got some essential oil, which is just incredibly strong. But I also have what a lot of distillers like to call the hydrosol, or properly termed the flower water or the plant water, and that's the byproduct of distill, and that makes a gorgeous wash for crystals.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it just has, actually I'll send you some, because it's so nice to work with. It's so strong, like so strong. So yeah. I've been cutting it with rainwater, so putting it with new moon rainwater and mixing it together. All of these things can go bad. Hydrosols and your distilled rainwater can grow bacterias, and you get little blooms inside them. So I do use a preservative in there called Lucidol, which is made from, it's chemically extracted, but it is considered an organic preservative, and it's made from horseradish, of all things.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's one of the ways I like to work with it. And I distill all my rainwater through the still and everything as well. So
yeah, that'd definitely take a lot of those contaminants out.
What other things have you seen mugwort used for?
So one of the other ways that I do use mugwort is because it is also a plant that's associated with silver, and silver is, of course, naturally protective. So in my garden, I have mugwort growing at the entrance and also at the east of the house for those protective properties as well. I like to sort of think about where my plants are in my garden and what their correspondences are. So that's one more little thing that I do with mugwort, is have it there in those sort of entering spaces.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Where we place our plants around the garden is one of those things you have to think about in terms of not just magically, but also it's really important that you put your plants in the right spot for them to grow the right way.
Exactly. You don't want to stunt them.
No. Not that I think there's anything that can stunt mugwort.
No.
I remember reading, I think it's the Herbcraft book by Anna Franklin and Susan Lavender. And it's kind of this really hinky looking book. It's got the ugliest cover. Like, it's really bad Photoshop on the cover. It comes from Capel Barn Publishing, and I think they print it on demand now. My copy is only a couple of years old, this one, and it's falling apart because it's print on demand. But there's a reason it's falling apart. It's awesome, right?
Yeah.
And in their book it says, mugwort is an aromatic perennial herb that grows to a height of between 2 and 4 feet. Like, no. Maybe where they are, sure. My mugwort is easily 3 meters high.
Oh, I remember visiting a friend because, it's often one of those plants I give out. I give out cuttings of mugwort. And I remember asking another witch friend once if she needed any mugwort. And she's like, no, I'm fine. And got to her house. And it was easily 4 to 5 meters tall. It was massive. It was just absolutely dwarfed me.
Exactly. It's just really funny because you see all these books that say it's really small, and then they start to talk about it using it as broomsticks, and you really see how it can be used as a broomstick once it gets that big.
It's massive. It becomes the size of a tree.
Yeah.
The moment you stick it in the ground, it just goes nuts.
Exactly. Even in a pot. Seriously, I've got my biggest mugwort at the moment is growing in a 60 centimetre pot, so about 60 centimetre diameter, maybe 50 centimetres high. And yeah, it's over the eaves of my house. So it's really interesting is the wood of mugwort. One of the things I love about mugwort stems, the really chunky stems, they get to about an inch and a half sort of in diameter, but they can be hollowed out. They've got a really soft pith in the middle, and I think that makes them awesome for using to make little spirit bottles and charm holders and things like that. So you take your piece of mugwort and you let it dry out, and one of the ways to stop it from cracking as it dries out is to paint it with turpentine. So you'll want to get a gum turpentine, not like the chemical turpentine.
Yeah.
At Bunnings, the gum turpentine has eucalyptus leaves on the front. You just paint it with that, every week or so until it dries out. And then you scrape out the pith, which by that time is really quite soft and dry. You just pull it out. And then you can cap either end with wax, and you can put whatever you want in there. And because it's wood, you can also inscribe and carve on the outside as well. That's one of the things I love to use mugwort sticks for.
That is a really, really beautiful way of using it.
Do you know, you were talking about mugwort and protection, and I do like to take the little twigs of mugwort. So, when you pick all the leaves off, you end up with these little twigs, usually about sort of 10 to 20 centimetres long. They make great protection charms. Like, you bind them into the shape of a witch's cross, so you make an X and then you go up through the middle of the X as well, or any other sort of protective symbol like a pentagram or whatever pleases you. They're really great for that as well, because you've got that spirit of the plant as well as the geomantic sort of symbol.
Yeah. Another one I do like to use too is just for protection, wreaths. Wreaths I find always work an absolute charm. And I have a few normally hanging above my bed or traditionally, as you see, on your front door. But yeah, making that circle of protection with them is another really beautiful way. And they are such malleable in their branches. They're so easy to weave and so easy to work with. And, if you sit down and you're, say, weaving a wreath, they're so easy to sort of work a charm into it as you lose yourself and you weave it into that protective circle.
That's really true. You know what? I really should try to make a basket out of mugwort.
Yeah, I've seen some of your basket weaving and it's absolutely beautiful.
That's fun. It's not as hard as everyone thinks it is, and it's fun. Like I said, the other day I was in the forest. It's called a forest. I'm allowed to call it a forest because its name says forest, even though it's not, right? Near my house, and there's a lot of kangaroos in there, so you find a lot of kangaroo bones over time. And so I found two, what I would probably assume are leg bones, and I made a cross, and then I started to weave a Bridget's cross or God's eye around them until I had like a circle. And then I just stuck some extra sticks in so that I made upright arms, and I wove around. Just used a weed called clematis, which grows up and all over our native trees, and you can pull it out quite easy, and just wove it all around until I had a basket. It was great fun.
Yeah. It doesn't take that long either, and you find, it's definitely best when you're out in the bush and you realise, I didn't bring anything with me, and you always wind up finding those treasures and your lugging armfuls out with you.
Yeah. Or I don't have any pockets. God damn it, why don't I have pockets? Stupid women's clothing.
Exactly.
Who else has interesting things to say about mugwort?
Well, I also know that there's a book, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the author Paul Beryl.
Mm-hmm.
He did a compendium of herbal magic, and he speaks about a few different ones as well in using them of children's rooms as well.
Really?
He states that, well, I'll read the little paragraph out here, but the protective energy of mugwort keeps one safe against all dark forces. Among women's mysteries, mugwort touches upon the mother. It is a special herb able to protect one's children. When cleaning the child's room, mugwort water might be asperged. The herb might also be burned upon the coal, the incense bringing protection. Mugwort brings your loved ones safely home from their journeys and may be added to amulets and medicine pouches.
It is really good as protective charms when travelling. We've talked about it, using it while you're travelling to, make the journey seem easier. We've talked about using it for protection, but, one of the things is you have to remember to combine all those things.
Yeah. Another one too I've heard, again, the same author, is he's mentioned that, say, your house is being battered by a raging storm, tossing a bit into the fire will help protect it to get it through.
Yeah, see, that's good. I like that.
He's got a really nice little quote here that I quite like, where mugwort is a fine herb to use on a regular basis, working like a tonic for one's soul. It helps us remain aware of our spiritual direction.
And I think that's really true. Like, it's definitely one of the herbs that I run my hand over every time I walk through my garden, and I feel like I know that plant spirit really well.
Yeah, like I said, it was, I think, one of my first ones I was really heavily drawn to using, and it's still to this day probably one of my most used herbs. It's always there. You always go outside. You always say hello. It's got a really, really lovely energy about it. I think the more you work with it, the more you sort of start to understand who it is.
You know, there's a book that I think it's out of print, but you still can get copies around. There's a lady called Mary K. Greer who's sort of really well known in the tarot world. She's written a lot of fantastic books about using tarot, but one of the books she wrote is called The Essence of Magic, and it's tarot, ritual, and aromatherapy. And she matches up different essential oils to the different tarot cards. She matches up mugwort to the hanged one, so the hanged man. And I think that's really good because it is that seeking of introspective knowledge, and that Odin hanging upside down and waiting for the knowledge to come to him. I really like that. Yeah, I love that idea of really looking at the tarot cards and herbs with them.
Yeah,
way to look at it.
It's a definitely interesting way to look at it, and it makes sense of, as you mentioned before, working with the hangman, because as we know, the hangman comes back to Odin, and as he was hanging, was it for 9 days in the tree? That's when the runes appeared before him in the sticks on the ground, and, runes again, divination, mugwort. It just always seems to sort of come full circle of, it definitely makes sense.
Mugwort's one of those plants that you can't use it too often or for a long time because it the effects diminish or they increase.
Yeah.
Now, the funny thing about some herbs is that, for some people, mugwort will make them completely hyper, and for other people, it will make them completely sleepy. So you just have to find out when you work with mugwort how it's going to affect you and take it slow.
Exactly, how you're going to respond to it. I also know I've heard of it being used as a liver tonic and to promote circulation as well in the past.
Yeah, of course, because it's a bitter herb. So it's always gonna be a liver tonic or any of those sort of things. So
it's got quite a few tannins in it from memory.
Yes, absolutely. Because of being a bitter tonic, it's also good if you're struggling with not wanting to eat. You can have some mugwort tea, and it will help your digestion. It's good if you've those times when people pig out on pizza and they really shouldn't.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of that.
Or especially if they might be a little bit lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is a cure for your lactose intolerance, but it will say that it can help with the flatulence, and it can help with that feeling of being greasy.
Yeah, well, I know it also helps with helping produce bile as well. And bile, if you've ever had your appendix out, you know that if you don't have enough bile in there because it's not being quite so regulated, it's where you get a lot of that. So yeah, if mugwort's helping that bile, it makes absolutely perfect sense of what you're saying.
Exactly. So, of course, at this point, we should say that we are not doctors.
No.
And any medical advice that you may hear on this program is you should consult with your GP. We are not giving medical advice. Anything you choose to do with any of these herbs is at your own risk.
100%.
And you should do your own research.
Because
exactly. What works for us might not work for you. One of the things we really wanted to do with this podcast was encourage people to work with these plants throughout the next lunar cycle. Podcasts come out on the new moon, and we'll be coming back with the next podcast on the next new moon. So in that intervening month, we really want people to get out there and work with the plants. So, Rue, what were your thoughts on what you're going to do with mugwort this month?
Well, coming into the new moon and being, that that dark period and, releasing things especially, I think, and it being divination as well. I think that it'd be definitely, time for a little bit of soul searching in that and seeing, especially at the beginning of the year, it's a good time to sort of look at direction and helping just sort of figure out what I want to do, what I want to put my energy into. So I think one of the things I'm definitely going to be doing this new moon is working with it for maybe a bit of scrying, working especially with that smoke, because like you said, and I like how you called it the dancing smoke, you do get those really, really, really beautiful thick plumes that you can definitely get lost in and sort of try and see what images come out, a bit like tea leaf reading. How about yourself?
Again, I think I'm going to do some divination, but I do want to try with the essential oil that I distilled, try Daniel Schultz's nuclear method of putting it under my nose and seeing what kind of dreaming I can do.
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear the effects that you get from that. That would be absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I think that'll be fun. And one of the things that I am going to do for our listeners is record a guided meditation with Mugwort. That'll be up around the full moon for you guys to download. And that's just a little bit of an extra thing that you guys can do to try to get in touch with Mugwort. You can burn an incense of Mugwort while you work with that meditation and see how you find the plant spirit.
Yeah, and I also think using it back as one of its most common and basic uses too of dreaming, of just, I'd love to hear if anybody wants to experiment with, even if you want to just try dipping your toe first and trying dream pillows or even tinctures or that, and see if it helps with lucid dreaming or just more visionary dreams, because I think that's at least something that is easy to sort of almost document for yourself and see what difference you'll get out of it and really see the effects of the plant.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think one thing we haven't touched on a lot is we've talked about all the uses of the plant. What's Mugwort like to you as a plant spirit?
I think, well, how do you sort of explain a person anyway? To me, it is really quite a soft energy, in my garden, but it's very gentle. It's very, very directing. But I mean, that's not to say that it is weak or anything like that. It definitely makes itself known. It's definitely a strong presence. It sounds a bit muddled up, and maybe I need to drink some mugwort tea to stop sort of rambling quite so much.
No, I do get it. It's like it's
a soft but enveloping presence for me.
Yeah, and for me that presence aligns with the Bodhisattva or Chinese Asian goddess of Kuan Yin. She's steadfast and strong and tall and upright and merciful and gentle. And I think that's probably one of the reasons I love Mugwort, is because I do find I have an affinity with Kuan Yin and I have worked with her a fair bit. But it has that gentle but with a centre of iron.
It's that feminine spirit, which, it is a feminine herb, it's used for menstrual cycles and that. I think it has that thing. It has that maternal almost instinct, but it does have, like you said, it has that scepter.
Actually, there is a lot about ghosts and Mugwort and keeping away infectious ghosts and ghosts that will have the bit of, that won't go away. And so I think there's a really good thing there. I want to do some protection powders with it around my property in the next month as well.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. I do normally, at least monthly, make I guess you could call it a witch powder, and place it around the home and all the entrances, and do seal my house. So I might, for my next one, because I am due yet again, to maybe put a bit of mugwort in it and just sort of see how those effects are. Alrighty, so we have a book of the week, which we're going to be, book of the month technically. So this month we're working with Gemma Gary's Traditional Witchcraft, A Cornish Book of Ways, published in 2008 by Troy Books. Gemma Gary is a witch from Cornwall and does a lot of extensive studies and writings on the history of witchcraft in especially Britain, which she's got a few other great books out there, especially The Black Toad. But I find her works definitely resonate with something that I've always sort of naturally done, and quite fascinating to see that history and that lore from a place that we all tend to come from, being originally European settlers.
For a lot of Australian witches, our ancestry is English. We're increasingly becoming much more multicultural, which means that, we're getting some fantastic influences from Asian witchcraft and spiritual practices and things as well, South African and Sudanese and that sort of thing. But I think still predominantly we can say that most of us, our ancestors, came over from Europe and
so
England.
It's sort of nice to see her history in it, and, she delves into her own history, and it sort of gives us a little bit of sense of what some of our possible witch ancestors were working with.
I think her books, like you said, they speak to you. They speak to me because they're about making magic.
Exactly, yeah. Because I grew up in a very rural area, and my magic naturally came from just working with the land and working with what I found and getting my hands in the dirt, as you like to say. And so that's why, to me as well, it makes sense. It's about using what you have and what you can find and working your magic in like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very hands-on magic.
Yeah. And like she says in a book, the traditional craft with its many and various branches is a craft born largely from the very landscape in which it is practiced, which exactly why I would define myself as this sort of craft and she has sort of helped bring it into the limelight more these days. It is something that has always been there, but it seems like in recent years there's been this sudden sort of flush that traditional witchcraft has come to the forefront a little bit more, and people are becoming a bit more aware of it. And I think that the general appeal is it's gritty and it's real, and it's about working with the magic rather than sort of sitting back and observing it.
I know that one of the things a lot of new witches get caught up on is black magic and white magic. Gemma has a really different take on this. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Gemma tends to, in her books, she generally splits it into 3 different colours. She has her red, her green, and her black. And so the way she so eloquently describes it is that the colours of the Cornish witch magic are red, green, and black. Red magic is ruled by the serpentine fire and the land. It is magic of potency, of empowerment to charge an item, being, or a place with a generative spiral is an act of red magic, as are workings of sexual energy and the laying down or directing of protective spirit forces. The familiar spirit of red magic is the red serpent. Green magic is ruled by physicality, the land, the green, and the growing things, and living beings which are animated by spiral, working of physical healing, herbcraft, material gain, and acts of green magic. The familiar spirit of green magic is the hare. Black magic forms 2 areas of practice, dealings with the unseen, the ethereal, the eldritch fortress, working with spirit magic, ancestral magic, seeing, and some acts of divination. Also, there is an area of practice involving influence control, deep emotions and behavioral patterns, sleep, dreams, bindings, curses, or owl blastings. The spirit familiars with black magic are the crow, mostly associated with the former area of practice, and the toad being associated mainly with the latter. So what is it? We've both clearly been drawn to her works in the past. So what is it that sort of draws you to her works?
For me, a lot of it is the do as you will. A lot of modern witchcraft modern witchcraft being Wicca and forward from the 60s, has a lot of dumbing down, making it sound nice for the people that might not understand that sometimes you have to be a little harder.
Yeah, the harm none rule.
Yeah, so you see the 3-fold rule where people talk about whatever you send out will come back to you by 3. And I think that's just a little bit of moralizing to sort of make the world's perception of witchcraft feel like better about itself. Whereas I sort of think you have to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
And I think that Gemma doesn't shy away from that she talks about witchcraft as having been a job as well as an understanding of the nature around us. She calls it the trade in this book.
Exactly.
And she says, you have, if you're going to know how to cure, you have to know how to curse. And, I think that one of the things that we often discount nowadays, because we've been so entrenched in this sort of fluffy magic is that we don't take enough ownership and power over our magic. So we sort of we'll often talk about how things are happening in our lives, and you just want to turn around and say, aren't you a witch?
Yeah.
If you're a witch, do something about this. You know?
Exactly. And those words have always sort of resonated in me from you actually last time we met up. I remember you saying those exact words, and it's so true. It's often, it seems like you're sort of stuck in a situation and sort of go, oh, what can you do? And there's, I don't know, I guess maybe a fear of taking responsibility, but it's, yeah, the point of being a witch is to control your own fate. So, like you said, do something about it.
Yeah, and that's not discounting that, you know, some people are Wiccan and it's a religion for them. It's not about the magic for them. It's about connection with a goddess, a certain pantheon of gods and things like that, you know. But for me, it's about making magic.
Exactly.
You know, it's about controlling my world.
Yeah. Diversity is a really beautiful thing, and, you know, it is great to have everyone of every facet and be able to look at what everyone else sort of finds their own way through life and what resonates best with them. And it's totally fine if, you know, Wiccan and, as some people like to call it, white magic is what works for them. Then I think that's a really beautiful thing, because at the end of the day, your spiritual path is for you and no one else. But I think I, like you, I like to, you know, really dig my hands into the grit of it and to, yeah, work with it in that same manner that you do. And like Gemma says, it's about building that reputation with that landscape and tapping into the energy of that landscape. And that's something that really resonates with me.
Yeah, and that's definitely a heavy influence in the first part of the book, is talking about how the witch calls up the sproul and the energies of the land and uses them and stores them, and really interesting to read, because it's stuff that you often realize you were doing instinctively.
Yeah.
You know, confirmation bias is always nice.
Exactly. I think that's one thing that definitely made a lot of sense for me. She speaks about, I remember working with the serpentine forces of the land and, you know, being able to draw it up at certain times of years and really being able to tap into it. And that's something that I'd always naturally done, especially in the area I grew up in, is that it's like ley lines. A lot of people like to work with ley lines of, you know, your own natural areas will always have those forces. You'll often be able to feel them when you walk over them and be able to know where those sweet spots are to be able to work with them.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the other things I really liked is, while in the first part of the book she does give a formal sort of circle casting and ritual preparation, she always points out that where the witch works is naturally a sacred space.
Yeah.
And I've really taken to calling what I used to call my altar my hearth, because it really is where I cook magic. I make magic. It's not just a place of worship. I don't just go there to pray. I go there to make magic.
Exactly.
So the second part of the book is called The Trade, Village Cunning, Substances and Charms. There are some awesome things in this part of the book, and I just love it.
Yeah, she has some...
What's your favourite part?
I don't think I could pick a favourite, but there's definitely, yeah, I really, really love everything that she has to teach about crafting your own magical items, your own talismans. She has a lot of really beautiful little written charms. Witch's bottles too is one of the ones that she likes to go through, which I always like to work with witch's bottles. I think it's one of those great basics that everyone should at least have a go at making their own. But
Totally.
One of my all-time favourites, so, has definitely been like the witch's ladder, that, you know, we've definitely spoken in the path of both of our passions for it, of, because there's always, I think, in a lot of different paths, you'll find people working with knots especially, and tying knots into rope, of catching magic and really putting intent into it and being able to keep it with you. So then, as Gemma Gary goes on to explain, working with putting, say, feathers into those knots to help, going back to it, like you were saying, of there's a lot of logic in magic of feathers flight. So once you tie that feather into that knot, you're helping that intent to be able to fly to its destination for that magic to do its work.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just so natural. Definitely, as we talked about with Mugwort and what we're planning to do throughout the next month, we'd like to encourage our listeners to come along with us as we work some of the charms and spells from traditional witchcraft. And I'm definitely going to be working on a witch's ladder with feathers.
Yeah.
And I know you were thinking about doing the same.
Well, yeah, I think it'd definitely be a great one for not just us, but for also any listeners out there that want to try their hand in it. It's because we do have that new moon coming up, which is, a great time for sending things out and doing that little bit of work of releasing things and, having, say, maybe that mugwort, having the smoke burning and having your witch's ladder being able to be rocked back and forth through that flame and really, really sort of help.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll summarise how to make a witch's ladder, and we'll pop that up on the blog for the podcast, and you'll be able to go through and, look at a couple of photos of how we made ours and hopefully make your own.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like that she does with the full moon in this book is she takes a white cord and sitting outside in front of the full moon, she closes one eye, and I think it's your left eye you close, and you tie a knot capturing the moon in the knot. So you look through the knot as you tie it to capture the moon and keep that force for when you're making another spell. And then you might be at your hearth making a protection spell or, a spell to bring you luck throughout the day or something, and you'll untie the knot to unbind the power of the moon that you stored in that cord. And I really love that. I've done that a couple of times and it really works. It's fantastic. It gives that real extra oomph to your magic.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. And I know I've read in other books as well talking about witches back in the day used to catch the winds and tie them in the knot, and then they'd sell those ropes to the sailors so that they'd take them to sea, and when they really needed those times of they needed wind to sail, they'd unleash their knots and they would have the wind. So again, it's just one of those things that, I think it's a really great way you can think about all the different aspects of what else can you catch in a knot and what else can you keep there for when you need it, because sometimes, you need to do magic and you can't wait a month until that next moon cycle. So it's great to just have there stored away for when you need it.
Now, Gem is an artist like you, and she has a lot of paper charms in this book. And I know you said you'd done some work with them. What's been your experience with the paper charms?
So yeah, she's had a few, especially little ones, to do with protection and that. And yeah, I've used them a few times in different normally little bags that I can carry with me with a few little bibs and bobs in there that sort of just for when I need them. And like sometimes myself, I've gone traveling or I just want that little bit of luck or such. And yeah, I've definitely found that the ones that have experimented in the past have done their work.
And that's the best thing about this book. It works. You can get out there and you can do it, and different parts of it will work really well. I have to say, one thing I really did pick up from Gemma's books is pin magic. I'd never really used pins before, but I've always made my own candles, and there's lots of magics that Gemma does where she puts pins in things, especially in candles, either for divination, like she'll put a pin in a candle and see which way it falls or how long it takes to fall to answer a question, or put pins into sort of time out a ritual, or pins into onions and garlic for protection, which is in her other book, The Black Toad, but I think is mentioned in this book as well.
Yeah.
I'd never used pins before aside from, voodoo dolls and poppets and things like that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I like about her too, is and I guess that's the thing of, witches in old, well, you sort of used what you had on hand, they didn't have the internet and they couldn't go, well, I need this Chinese herb that I can only find on eBay. So what do I have on hand? I have pins, and I know one of her spells she works with, I think it's cow's heart, of nails into it. And I really, really love that idea of I haven't found anything in her books that hasn't been accessible.
Yeah, exactly right, because that's in The Black Toad, and it has a fantastic charm with it. Here it is. May each pin thus stuck in this poor heart in hers go in, who hurts me so till she departs. And it's really great. I love it because, we've all worked with that person who is a real pain in the ass and just has to leave. Would be really good. And, getting hearts is not as hard as you might think. If you can't get a cow's heart, you can always get lamb's hearts at butchers, and even at the supermarket.
Even chicken hearts, you can get them by the kilo at mostly in the dog food aisle. You'll find a lot of things that you want to work with. They're not that hard, or you can always, like you said, go to your local butchers and just ask them.
Yeah, they've got all sorts of bits and pieces. Tongue. There's lots of charms with tongue. I think in the Black Toad she's got a tongue charm as well.
Is it, I think from memory, to stop gossip?
I think that's right.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure
I'd looked at it once before and thought, it was quite an interesting use, and
things like using lead. It was really funny. I remember first reading the book and her talking about using lead from a church roof, and I was like, where am I going to get lead from a church roof? I was in East Melbourne, not East Melbourne, South Melbourne, down near Albert Park, and they were re-shingling a church roof, and of course there's all this lead, but I just couldn't bring myself to take any, because this is years ago, and I just thought, I can't do it, and I totally should have. I really regret not doing it. But of course you can get lead at Bunnings. It's in the aisle for roofing. You just go there, buy a sheet of lead.
I think one of the other ones she also speaks about too is using at some point coffin nails, and it's the same thing of where am I going to get coffin nails? Funnily enough, you often find them being sold online, the magic of the internet. But I remember thinking to myself at one point when I wanted them, it's well, why not make them yourself? Fashion yourself a small handheld coffin, put nails in it, and then use it for its intended purposes, bury it, and then reuse it. There's always sorts of ways around these things, and I think there's always substitutes. I don't think everything has to always be so black and white and you have to use this. It's, there's always a little bit more oomph if it, say, is lead from a church roof, but I think lead can still be used.
And I think that's a good thing is, she does talk about the mandrake spirit and using mandrakes as a spirit house. And she does say that, in England, often they used bryony root. So it doesn't have to be a mandrake root. One of the most accessible thick, man-like roots is parsley. It's a very, very saturnine herb, parsley, so it really does have that connection with the underworld, and it's great to use for that kind of thing. Take it out of the ground, carve it into a face, and then put it back in the ground. It will keep growing, because parsley is the most weedy thing ever.
Oh, it is. I grew it once about 3 years ago, and ever since I've had it sprouting up everywhere, and we had this massive bush that was growing. It was probably about 2 foot tall, 2 foot wide. It was huge, and it was growing out of the cracks in the bricks. And a house full of 4 people at the time, because we had friends living with us for a small period, and we're all massive parsley eaters. It took us a good few months to finally get through that bush. And then when I went to cut it back and pull that root out, that root was about 6 centimeters wide. It was absolutely massive. I couldn't even get the strength to pull it out from between those bricks. It's an amazingly huge root to work with. It's great.
I think it's just one of those things is sometimes we just need to be a bit adaptable. The last part of the book, she does talk about furry nights. It's probably the part of the book I've had the least interaction with, because I'm not a huge Sabbath person.
No, I have to say I'm sort of with you there. There are ones that, it's times of the year I work with, but it's probably the same least used part of the book for me as well. I like a lot more of her charms and her practicality side of things.
Yeah, I think I'm the same, and it's just really funny because she talks about how the equinoxes are not observed ritually, whereas for me, I find the equinoxes really, really useful, and I always have. So I think that's when she said that, I just sort of might have switched off a little. So what are you thinking of working in the next month, aside from the Witch's Ladder?
Well, I think you've definitely given me some food for thought with the pins, and I think I'm definitely going to sort of, because I have a few lying around, I think I'm going to sort of have a look at the different ways that I can use it. Not really Maleficent in a way that she has in times, but I like the way of being able to, say, count the hours with the candle, but I particularly like the idea that pins are quite transdimensional. If they're puncturing into something, they're breaking that space, they're going through that veil. So I think I'd definitely like to work with that a bit more now that you've sort of brought it to the forefront of my mind. I definitely want to do, like I said before, I want to make another witch's bottle. I'm a bit overdue. I think my last one's probably worked its magic. It's time for a new one. But I think also because, us both being artists of maybe making a few more of her charms and just sort of seeing the effects that I can get. I know I've worked with a charm from, there's a book called Protection and Reversal Magic by Jason Miller, I believe. And I recently made one of his little charms that he normally works with Hecate. And so I made one for my partner, and the moment that just as I really put my intent and created it, that the smoke alarm downstairs that suddenly just started going off. And when my partner went to check it, he found that the battery had actually been pulled from the connector. And if you try and it's one of those little blue ones that you sort of stick on the battery, they're really quite hard to get off. And so it was just one of those strange little things that how could that possibly happen? And right at that intensely moment of creating that charm. So, it has been a few years since I've made her charm, so I'd really like to go back through and just really see what kind of effect I get from them.
I've made her witch powder in the past, and I think I'm going to spend some time making her witch's oil under her liquids of magic. It does have to sit for 6 months in a cool, dark place. So, we won't see some results for that really quickly. But, I do want to do some work with that and get that started. And in 6 months' time, we'll come back and see how it's working.
Yeah, definitely. She's also got a few other, I don't know, I think from memory she made them herself, but I know she also had some historical ones of the necklaces made with vertebrae, and in hers it's garnet and serpent spine, which I think was quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And I know I've got, actually sitting in my bathroom at the moment after cleaning them last night, I've got vertebrae from a wallaby, and then I also have some from a bird. I think that might be another one that I make, is I make a little bit of jewellery, which is something I've been toying with the idea of lately for ritual use and for working with my craft.
And one of the other things she has in the book is a house doll or house spirit, where you've got this old woman that you make a doll of an old woman, and when you want something, you ask her for it. And you have to feed her and say goodnight to her and that sort of thing. And it's always seemed a very intensive practice to do that. And so I've always sort of put it off, but I do really want to do it. And I've got different types of clay, and I feel like I could make a doll that would work.
I did do something like that quite a few years ago. I made a trio of spirits from clay, and yeah, it involved a lot, like you said, of constantly feeding them that energy for them to work their magic. And I think in the end of it, I sort of decided to destroy them all because it was such an intense project. But the results were absolutely tangible. It was absolutely amazing just how much power you can get out of it. And it ties back into having the doll of the grandmother, coming back to that mandrake root. I know that there's some families that have passed mandrake roots down to other generations, and it is a very intense process of it needs to be constantly fed and it needs constant attention, and some create their own little coffins to keep it in, and some are carved like people. And then you hear about sometimes when people don't keep up with constantly feeding it, things can turn quite sour. So it's it's quite some responsibility, but I really do think the effects of working with almost creating golems in a sense, it's intense.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, as you know, I grow some mandrakes and I have been for a few years now. And they're intensive little plants to grow. I do make sure that I give my mandrakes wine and tobacco, and I talk to them all the time because they're hungry spirits,
Of course.
And I think that's really important. Actually, one of the other things I have made from Gemma's books is banishing whisks. It's really intensive, but if you can get dried blackberry twigs, so, at the end of blackberry season, there's often dried thorny lengths of blackberry that you can cut. Now, no matter how thick your gloves, you will get poked. It's just the blackberry taking its payment for what you're taking from it. But I do love to get them, and then I cut them down to about 8 inches, 20 centimetres, 25 centimetres long. Bind them together at one end with thread and wax. And then what you do is you light the end, and it's a really effective banishing whisk to get rid of unquiet dead, or, especially if you start to work with spirits, you may find the need for that extra bit of oomph with your banishing or cleansing outer space. And sometimes I even use it when my in-laws come around and they're ones I don't really like. Not my mother-in-law or my father-in-law, they're wonderful, but there's always extended family that sometimes you don't love.
Yeah, just get it out and flog them. That'll send them away pretty quick.
Yeah. Usually I just sort of sit them down in front of the bookshelf with a cup of tea and they leave within 2 minutes.
Yeah, I like having people come over and they sort of wander into my kitchen and notice all the jars and start to read the labels and the descriptions, and you just sort of see their face turn. And if it's someone that clearly you don't want in your home, it's nice to see them sort of abruptly decide to take their leave.
Yeah. I love it when it's the ones they pick up the jar and it's actually full of bones soaking off the flesh, and you're like, you just wait for it. It's like they almost drop the jar in horror. You have to be ready to catch it. Yeah, but banishing whisks are great, and she does also suggest that you can make them from pine needles to draw in prosperity and things like that. So I love that idea of, not a smudge so much, but this thing that has to be activated with movement. You bind it together at one end, you light the other end, and you wave it around furiously.
Yeah.
And that you really get some energy into it rather than just sort of tentatively walking around the house with a smudge stick. I kind of like that physicality of the magic.
Exactly. It was only the other day that I've got a nice little wooden box and I opened it and found one of the banishing whisks that you'd made me quite a few years ago, and I've never had the heart to use it because it's just so beautifully crafted. And so it's been sort of eyeballing me from the corner lately, thinking, maybe it's a good time. Maybe I'll put that one into effect as well. Or if we're working a bit through this book for the next month, I'll do that while I and we can make our witches' powders and just sort of see the effects that we get. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting to see what we get and what our listeners get from working with this book and working with a couple of options that we're going to pop up on the blog as well. So, listeners, in terms of getting in touch with us, one of the things we do want to do is we want to hear about your experiences. There's a couple of ways you can tell us about that. You can drop us a line at questions@gardenofInkandbones.com, or you can go to the website and we've actually got a recording facility. So just on the side of the website, you'll see leave a voicemail. And if you're feeling chatty, tell us your story. And if you have any questions about what we've been working on or questions about magical plants that you'd like us to answer, drop us a line either on the email, on the voicemail, or on Instagram. And we'd love to hear from you because it won't always be just us talking to each other.
Exactly, yeah. I'd love to hear people's results in some of the things that we work with, or even your own ideas of how can we branch out information out. How do you work with things that we hadn't thought about? Like Mugwort, is there a different way that you've worked with it? I'd absolutely love to hear about it.
We do definitely want to hear, how was your dream experience when you used Mugwort as a dream pillow?
Yeah.
In the next lunar cycle.
Yeah, keep a journal next to your bed, record it, see how your dreams begin to change, see if maybe you can try and find that little bit of leverage to start controlling your dreams a bit more. Just see what effects you get, and definitely get back to us with that.
If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to drop us a line. We'll get back to you. It's been great. I think our first episode is in the can, and we really hope that you enjoy the podcast. And if you do enjoy the podcast, tell your friends. You can find me at Belladonna and Bones on Instagram, and the website is belladonnaandbones.com. And Rue, where can people find you?
And they can find me on Instagram at old_omen. You'll find my work there. It's still in its early phases, so I'll slowly be putting up a bit more artwork and what I'm working with in my garden or wild harvesting. But yeah, feel free to drop me a line.
And you can always find us at gardenofInkandbones.com.
Awesome.
Thanks for spending some time with us. I personally would like to thank Saint Expedite for helping me in my magic. And I'd also like to thank the Spirit of Mugwort and Gemma Gary for writing such a wonderful book.
Yeah, 100%.
Rue?
Yeah, I'd like to definitely thank my ancestral spirits that I work a lot with. And I think until next new moon.
We'll see you then.
See ya.